Imagine an architecture not of straight lines and right angles, an architecture that rejects the cold, impersonal glass box, but instead an architecture of motion, of fish scales, of crumpled paper, of sails billowing in an urban wind, an architecture that seems to defy gravity, logic, and sometimes its own structural integrity, a chaotic ballet of titanium and light. This is not a fantasy. This is the world of Frank Gehry, the man who quite literally bent the rules of modernism and reshaped our very understanding of what a building could be, who transformed the skyline from a collection of predictable shapes into a landscape of dreams and disputes. For decades, Gehry has been a polarizing force, a rock star in a profession of quiet draftsmen, a sculptor of titanium and chain link who forced cities to look in the mirror and see something wild, chaotic, and undeniably beautiful staring back. Welcome to UrbArchitect. I'm your host. And today, for the next 40 minutes, we are diving deep into the life, the philosophy, the triumphs, the controversies, and the iconic, gravity-defying works of Frank Owen Gehry. This is the story of how a boy from Toronto named Ephraim Goldberg became Frank Gehry, and how he gave birth to an architectural language so powerful that a single building, the Guggenheim Bilbao, could revitalize an entire post-industrial city, creating what we now call the Bilbao effect, a term that haunts and inspires city planners to this day. But to understand the revolution, we must start with the rebel, and to understand the rebel, we must go back to the very beginning, to the raw materials of a life. Gehry's story begins not with grandeur, but with humility, with struggle, and with a fascination with the mundane that would later become his trademark. Born in 1929 to Polish Jewish immigrants, young Ephraim grew up in a Toronto neighborhood that was far from privileged. His father's business failures cast a long shadow, and Gehry has spoken openly about the bullying he faced for being Jewish, an experience that perhaps forged in him a resilience, a willingness to be an outsider. But within this challenging environment, creativity flourished. He would spend hours with his grandmother, building intricate miniature cities out of wood scraps from his grandfather's hardware store. This was his first studio, his first lesson in materiality, in the feel of wood, in the joy of constructing worlds from nothing. But it was a more personal living material that left a profound and recurring mark. Gehry has often recounted, with a sense of poetic wonder, how his mother would bring live carp home from the market, letting it swim in the bathtub before preparing it for gefilte fish. The movement, the scales, the iridescent skin of the creature captivated him. It was a biological sculpture, a form perfected by evolution, a shape that was both structure and skin, and it would surface again and again in his work, from the fish dance restaurant in Kobe, Japan, to the shimmering, scaly skin of the Guggenheim Bilbao. It's a foundational myth for his architecture. Not something imposed from above, but something organic, discovered, and fluid. His family moved to Los Angeles in 1947, and the sun-drenched, sprawling, and somewhat chaotic city of cars, pop culture, and endless possibility became his new canvas. He drove a truck to put himself through school at USC and then briefly attended Harvard, but found the rigid, corporate modernism of the time stifling, soul-crushing. He was more inspired by the raw, unpretentious energy of LA's urban landscape, the chain-link fences, the corrugated metal sheds, the asphalt, the unglamorous commercial strips that modernism wanted to erase. This led to his first major philosophical pivot, what some called cheapskate architecture, or what he would later refine into an interest in the cheap and ephemeral. He saw beauty in the unfinished, the ad hoc, the things that were built to last a season, not a century. This wasn't about being cheap for cheap's sake. It was an aesthetic and ethical stance against the polished perfection of corporate architecture. It was a search for honesty. And this search culminated in the project that would put him on the map, a project that was also his home. In the late 1970s, Gehry began a series of renovations on his own Santa Monica home that would send shockwaves through the architectural community. He took a modest, unassuming pink bungalow and wrapped it in a riotous, provocative shell of corrugated metal, chain link, glass, and raw plywood. Crucially, he left the original structure visible within this new cage, creating a dynamic, unsettling dialogue between the old and the new, the finished and the unfinished, the domestic and the industrial. The neighbors were horrified. The architectural world was intrigued, then divided. Here was an architect not hiding the messy process of building but celebrating it. This house wasn't about creating a perfect, pristine object. It was about an idea, a critique of the suburban dream, and a bold declaration that beauty could be found in the rough, the ready, and the real. This deconstructivist approach, taking the architectural vocabulary of a house apart and reassembling it in unexpected, jarring ways, became his signature. It was a manifesto written in chain link. But the Santa Monica house was just the thesis statement, the sketchbook idea. The first major chapter in Gehry's built argument, the proof that this language could work at a larger scale, came in 1991 with the Vitra Design Museum in Wall am Rhein, Germany. This was a whirlwind of white plaster, a composition of interconnected, curvilinear forms that looked less like a building and more like a group of abstract sculptures caught in a dynamic, frozen dance. It was here that Gehry began his long and fruitful collaboration with the aerospace engineering software CATIA, originally developed for designing Dassault fighter jets. This partnership was a game-changer. CATIA allowed Gehry's team to translate his fluid, hand-sculpted models, often made of crumpled paper and tape, into buildable, complex geometries. It could calculate the stresses, the angles, the precise shapes of thousands of unique components. The Vitra Museum was a proof of concept. The crazy ideas could not only be drawn, they could actually be engineered and built to stand up. It was the end of the excuse that a form was too complex to construct. Then in 1996, a project in Prague would show the world that Gehry's style wasn't just about standalone objects. It could engage in a profound, if contentious, conversation with history. The dancing house, co-designed with Czech architect Vlado Malunik, rose on a riverbank plot that had been destroyed during World War II. Instead of mimicking the neighboring Baroque, Art Nouveau, and Gothic buildings, Gehry created a dialogue through contrast. The building depicts a couple, the famous dancers Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, locked in a graceful embrace. One tower, Ginger, curves and swirls in a glass dress, while the more static Fred, with its metal hat, provides support. It was playful, whimsical, and deeply controversial. Purists saw it as a vulgar intrusion, but others saw it as a bold statement that a contemporary building didn't have to be invisible to respect its context. It could engage with it through narrative, emotion, and contrast, acknowledging the past while firmly belonging to the present. It was architecture as storytelling. But all of these projects were a prelude to the symphony, the building that would change everything, not just for Gehry but for global architecture, for city planning, for the very economics of culture, the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao. When it opened in 1997, it was an immediate worldwide sensation. Photographs of its titanium-clad forms, evoking a ship, a flower, or a fish, circled the globe. The legendary architect Philip Johnson called it the greatest building of our time. But what made it so revolutionary? Let's break it down beyond the iconic image. First, the form and its relationship to the city. Gehry didn't plop a sculpture down. He designed the museum as a direct, visceral response to its urban and riverine context. The building stretches and coils along the Nervion River, its forms echoing the port's industrial past with ship-like shapes, and the surrounding hills of the Basque Country. It's not a solitary, inward-looking object. It engages with the city, with a massive titanium-clad flower welcoming visitors from the Puente de la Salve Bridge, which Gehry ingeniously incorporated into the design with the tower that frames it. The building invites you in, pulls you along its curves, creating a promenade architectural that is both exhilarating and intuitive. Second, the material. The choice of titanium was inspired. Over 33,000 thin, half-millimeter sheets were used, chosen for their lightweight nature and their magical ability to capture light in a constantly changing way, appearing silver, gold, or gray depending on the weather and time of day. This was alchemy, turning an industrial metal into something almost organic, living, and breathing with the sky. Third, the technical achievement. The Bilbao project pushed the digital process to its absolute limits. The CATIA software allowed for the precise fabrication of thousands of unique steel members and stone panels, a task that would have been impossible, or astronomically expensive, with traditional drafting. This marriage of artistic vision and digital technology became the new blueprint for complex architectural fabrication, proving that the computer was not just a drafting tool, but a fundamental part of the creative and constructive process. And finally, the cultural and economic impact. The Bilbao effect was born. The museum attracted millions of tourists, single-handedly transforming Bilbao from a struggling, post-industrial city into a top-tier cultural destination. It created a new paradigm for city mayors and cultural institutions worldwide. Could a single spectacular piece of architecture, a so-called icon, be an economic engine for urban renewal? This legacy is double-edged, leading to both incredible cultural projects and sometimes a problematic focus on iconic architecture at the expense of thoughtful urban planning and community needs, a tension we will explore further. Emboldened by the success of Bilbao, Gehry embarked on another epic project back in his adopted home of Los Angeles, a project that had a long and difficult gestation, the Walt Disney Concert Hall. Interestingly, the design actually predated Bilbao, but funding delays meant it opened 6 years later, in 2003. This project presented a different, perhaps more profound challenge, creating not just an icon, but a vessel for sublime sound, for the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Working with the renowned acoustician Minoru Nagata, Gehry designed a hall with a vineyard-style seating arrangement, surrounding the orchestra with audience members on multiple tiers, creating an intimate and immersive acoustic experience. But the exterior is the public face, the civic landmark. Composed of undulating stainless steel panels, the building shimmers in the Southern California sun, a billowing ship of music set against the downtown skyline. The story of its construction is filled with lessons. The original stone-clad design was deemed too expensive, leading to the switch to steel. And then, after completion, residents in a nearby condominium complained of blinding glare and intense heat from the curved steel surfaces, which acted like parabolic mirrors. Gehry's team had to go back and use a computer-controlled airplane wing polisher to lightly sand every single panel, dulling the finish just enough to solve the problem without losing the shimmer. It's a perfect Gehry anecdote, a visionary form, an unforeseen real-world consequence, and an innovative technologically aided hands-on solution. It shows that even for a master, architecture is a process of learning and adaptation. Gehry's work isn't just about cultural temples. It's also about rethinking the everyday urban fabric, about bringing his unique vision to the typology that defines the modern city, the skyscraper. Take 8 Spruce Street in New York City, formerly known as Beekman Tower. Completed in 2011, this 76-story skyscraper is one of the tallest residential towers in the Western Hemisphere. But it doesn't look like a typical monotonous glass box. Its facade is a rippling flowing curtain of 10,500 unique stainless steel panels, a direct and dramatic challenge to the blandness of the standard high-rise. Gehry treated the surface not as a flat, anonymous plane but as a textured, sculptural element, like folds of fabric, creating a dynamic, ever-changing presence in the lower Manhattan skyline that captures the light in 1,000 different ways throughout the day. It proves that even within the extreme constraints of a skyscraper's economics and engineering, there is room for artistic expression, for a humanizing irregularity that gives a building a soul and a unique identity in a forest of sameness. Crossing the Atlantic again to the heart of Paris, we find perhaps Gehry's most ethereal and refined creation, the Fondation Louis Vuitton, opened in 2014. Situated in the Bois de Boulogne, this building is a testament to his late career mastery. He described it as a magnificent vessel symbolizing the cultural calling of France. It consists of 12 immense glass sails, suspended on a structure of glue-laminated wooden beams, all supported by white, sculptural concrete blocks nicknamed the icebergs. The technical challenge was immense. Crafting the 3,600 glass panels and the 19,000 concrete formwork panels to form the complex, doubly curved surfaces of the sails required new, groundbreaking manufacturing techniques. The result is a building of breathtaking lightness and transparency, a cloud of glass that reflects the park, the water, and the sky, constantly changing its appearance. It is less a solid object and more an environment, a play of light and reflection. It shows Gehry using his formidable technical arsenal not for sheer spectacle, but to achieve a level of poetic weightlessness, a building that seems to dematerialize before your eyes. Of course, a career this bold, this visible, and this expensive has not been without its fierce controversies and critics. Some of the most pointed criticism has come from within the architectural theory world. The late Hal Foster and others have accused Gehry of creating one-liner buildings, spectacular objects that prioritize form over function and ignore their urban context, becoming selfish sculptures. They argue that the Bilbao effect has been a dangerous seduction, leading cities around the world to pursue flashy architectural trophies by starchitects, at the expense of thoughtful, equitable urban planning that addresses housing, infrastructure, and community needs. There are also the perennial questions about budget overruns. The Disney halls cost famously ballooned, though Gehry's team would argue with considerable evidence that the complexity is precisely calculated from the start, and that their sophisticated use of digital technology, like CATIA and its successors, actually reduces construction errors and controls costs more effectively than traditional methods. Furthermore, Gehry has famously bristled at the Starchitect label, insisting that he runs a deeply collaborative studio, a workshop where ideas are tested and developed by a team. He positions himself not as a lone genius, but as the captain of a ship of talented navigators. A surprising and telling fact: despite the incredibly complex, computer-dependent appearance of his final buildings, Gehry's design process remains resolutely, stubbornly analog. It almost always starts with quick, intuitive, messy sketches, then moves rapidly to large-scale physical models made from cardboard, paper, foam, and wood. He's a sculptor at heart, feeling the form with his hands, bending and folding, searching for the right gesture before the digital wizards in his studio translate it into a buildable reality. This blend of the tactile, the intuitive, and the technologically advanced is the true key to understanding his genius. It's a refusal to let the computer dictate the form. The tool serves the vision, not the other way around. So why does Frank Gehry's work matter so much today? For urban life and for architectural education. For our cities, Gehry demonstrated, for better and for worse, that architecture has the power to be a profound civic gesture, an economic catalyst, and a source of identity. A building can be more than a container. It can be a symbol, a gathering place, a destination. He showed that bold, contemporary, even difficult design can create memorable, humanizing spaces that draw people in, spark conversation, and make us see our urban environments with fresh eyes. He forced us to ask, should our cities be safe and predictable, or should they inspire wonder and debate? For architectural education, his legacy is immense and twofold. First, he shattered the strictures of late modernism and postmodernism, opening the door for a more expressive, sculptural, and personal architecture. He gave permission to a generation of architects to explore complex forms, to embrace movement, and to use new materials in expressive ways. He reconnected architecture to art. Second, and perhaps more importantly from a practical standpoint, he was a crucial pioneer in the integration of advanced digital tools into the entire design and construction process. He proved that the most radical forms could be rationally engineered and built. Today, the use of BIM and parametric modeling is standard in architecture schools and firms worldwide, and Gehry's office, Gehry Partners, and its associated technology company, Gehry Technologies, were instrumental in proving it was not just possible, but necessary for the future of the profession. He forced the entire industry to evolve, to up its game. As we look to the future, the lessons from Gehry are not necessarily about copying his style. The world doesn't need 1,000 Bilbao knockoffs, but about embracing his spirit. The spirit of fearless experimentation. The commitment to deep collaboration between artist, architect, and engineer. The belief that a building should move the spirit, not just shelter the body. The understanding that our tools, whether a piece of crumpled paper or a supercomputer, are there to serve a human emotional vision. Frank Gehry, now in his 90s, is reportedly still designing, still questioning, still pushing. His career is a powerful, enduring reminder that architecture is, at its best, a great art form. It is the art of creating space that inspires, challenges, and delights. He took the rigid, often impersonal box of modernism and bent it, folded it, and twisted it into something fluid, something emotional, something defiantly alive. He taught us that the city is not just a collection of buildings, but a stage for human drama, and that on that stage there is always room for a little poetry, a little chaos, a lot of titanium, and the enduring belief that a building can be a dream built. Thank you for joining us on this deep exploration of a true urban architect. What Gehry building speaks to you, and what is your take on the Bilbao effect? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the architects who shape our world. Until next time, keep looking up. But our story isn't quite complete. To truly appreciate the scope of Gehry's impact, we need to look beyond the iconic museums and towers to projects that reveal other facets of his philosophy. Consider the Ray and Maria Stata Center at MIT, completed in 2004. This building, a complex for computer and information sciences, is a riot of tilting towers, colliding geometries, and wildly colored panels. It looks like a village designed by Dr. Seuss after an earthquake. And that's precisely the point. Gehry stated he wanted to create an environment that fostered creativity and chaotic collaboration, breaking down the formal barriers of traditional academic buildings. The intentionally disordered forms are meant to stimulate the mind, to encourage the unexpected encounters that lead to innovation. Of course, it also famously led to a lawsuit from MIT over leaks and drainage problems, a reminder that pushing the envelope of form often means encountering unforeseen practical challenges. This building exemplifies Gehry's belief that architecture can actively influence behavior, not just house it. Then there is the Biomuseo in Panama City, a museum dedicated to biodiversity. Here, Gehry's forms are not just abstract. They are explicitly symbolic, with colorful, overlapping metal roofs representing the tectonic collision that created the Isthmus of Panama, an event that changed the planet's biodiversity. It's a building that tells a story before you even walk inside, showing Gehry's ability to translate narrative into built form in a direct, almost graphic way. And we cannot forget his work in his hometown with the Art Gallery of Ontario renovation. Here, facing a beloved institution, Gehry showed remarkable restraint and sensitivity. While he added his signature elements, a spectacular glass and wood facade, a stunning spiral staircase made of blue Douglas fir, he worked within the existing fabric of the building, creating a dialogue between old and new that was more about enhancement than revolution. It proved that Gehry is not a one-trick pony. He can listen to a context and respond with grace as well as power. Finally, let's talk about the legacy for the next generation. Gehry's influence is everywhere. You can see it in the fluid forms of Zaha Hadid's work, in the complex facades of firms like UN Studio, and in the digital exploration that is now commonplace in architecture schools. He demolished the idea that complexity was impossible. He also represents a certain model of architectural practice, the artist's architect as a brand, a personality. This has its downsides, potentially concentrating prestige and large commissions in the hands of a few global figures. But it also reaffirms the role of the architect as a visionary, as someone who can capture the public imagination. The debate around Gehry is as important as the buildings themselves. It forces us to ask fundamental questions. What is the purpose of architecture in the 21st century? Is it to provide quiet, efficient background, or is it to stop us in our tracks, to make us feel, to argue, to wonder? Is the Bilbao effect a recipe for revitalization, or a dangerous addiction to spectacle? There are no easy answers, but Gehry's work ensures we keep asking the questions. His career is a challenge thrown down to every architect, every student, every city planner. Dare to be different. Dare to use every tool at your disposal. Dare to believe that a building can be a work of art that transforms a city. That is the enduring, complicated, and thrilling legacy of Frank Gehry. Final, conclusive tone as music begins to swell. From the wood scraps in his grandfather's shop to the titanium sails of Bilbao, his has been a journey of relentless imagination. He re-enchanted the built world for us. So the next time you look at a building that seems to defy the ordinary, that curves where you expect a straight line, that shimmers with an unexpected light, remember that Frank Gehry helped make that world possible. He gave us permission to imagine a more fluid, more expressive, and more human architecture. Thank you for watching.